social media show the alliance celebrating at the airport's terminal building. Libya has been gripped by a conflict between rival militias since Colonel Gaddafi was overthrown in 2011. Chris Stephen is the Libya correspondent for The Guardian newspaper. He's currently in London. So who are these militias and what do they want?
The militia that's captured the airport is from the town of Misrata. And in the revolution 3 years ago, they were aligned with another militia from Zintan, which is another town, and they fought together against Gaddafi. Well, since then they've fallen out, and they've been fighting over this airport now for the last 5 weeks, and the Misratans have now captured it from the Zintanis.
What's the situation with the Libyan government? Because they've come out and condemned them as terrorists, haven't they?
That's right. Well, the Misratans are backed by the Islamists, and the Islamists were in control of the previous government. But there were elections in June, and that government has been replaced by another government which is not Islamist anymore. So what the Misratans are doing is they're backing the former government rather than the new government. So we now seem to have two governments, one led by Islamists and the other one led by non-Islamists. And that's what's causing the conflict.
What's the situation in Tripoli generally, Chris? Because this is just the airport, and looking at pictures, the airport is pretty well demolished anyway. What's the significance of taking the airport?
Well, the airport sort of dominates the city, and the significance is that it gives the Misratans and the Islamists a commanding hold on the city. But as you say, it's taken 5 weeks to get it, and there have been thousands of rockets and shells fired by both sides, and much of the city has been smashed up, and now hospitals are in trouble. They're running out of food. So the situation is getting pretty desperate, really, for ordinary people in Tripoli.
And does the government have an army that it can call on to take the airport back, or what's that situation?
The government's having to rely on other militias, and that's really the problem. And it's been Libya's problem for the last 3 years, that it's really a patchwork of different militias. So the government's now trying to find its own militias, making its own alliances, and calling on pro-government militias to fight against these militias. So again, it's very much a sort of shifting alliance between two sets of militias.
I was talking to Chris Stephen a short while ago. John Fisher-Burns, chief foreign correspondent for the New York Times. You were in Tripoli, weren't you, during the bombing campaign to oust Gaddafi?
I was indeed. I spent many weeks under those bombs. Deeply grateful, I have to say, regrettable as the civilian casualties that resulted were, for the great accuracy of these modern weapons, because we could sit in the hotel, built a very, very luxurious hotel built by one of Gaddafi's sons, and watch the fireworks. And some of these bombs were falling 200 yards away from us.
So what's your view of what's happened since?
Well, I think that, we can see a pattern rather similar to Iraq. We shattered the old order with hardly a thought at what would ensue, beyond the utterly naive idea that in this very unpromising terrain, democracy would take root, the sort of democracy that's taken countries of northwestern Europe 1,000 years or more to develop. That was never going to happen, and it seems to me that in both cases, we're eventually going to see, after much bloodshed, and we may only be at the beginning of this whole procedure, return to the status quo ante. That is to say, there'll be a strong man, and he will reassert order, probably with a great deal of brutality.
And let me bring Matthew Green in here. You have a view as well, don't you, Matthew, about what happens after intervention?
Well, that's right. I'd like to pick up on what John was saying. It's a dilemma that we've seen in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Libya. You have the old order collapsing, and then what takes its place? Often the West likes to encourage institution building, elections, parliaments and so forth, which of course are all very well, but the realities in so many of these countries is that power lies in the shadow state, in these networks of militia groups, of often a huge illegal economy, and power brokers. So it's very difficult to reconcile the two.
Well, let's move on to another of our main stories at this half hour, and that's to the situation in Iraq. As if there hadn't been enough horror stories already about the fighters of Islamic State and their extraordinary success seizing ground, now Iraq's most influential cleric, Grand Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani, has voiced his worries over the plight of more than 10,000 fellow Shia Muslims in the town of Amerli. They're surrounded by Islamic State militants. The Deputy Special Representative of the UN in Iraq, Georgi Bushtin, said the people in the town were in need of urgent humanitarian aid.
The situation in the town is dire. We have just recently spoken to the director of the district of Amerli. He complained bitterly about shortages of everything. But the most difficult shortage is definitely the shortage of food and medicine. And they are in dire need of humanitarian assistance in any form and urgent.
And today we've just been getting reports from our correspondent in Baghdad that militants have launched an attack on the Beji refinery in northern Iraq, although government forces say they've defeated it and killed and injured insurgents. We'll bring you more on that in our news programmes. On Thursday, US officials described these